The picture on the front of your bulletin of a rather tough, gruff-looking man is a picture of my grandfather, Bob Hester, who I'm starting to look like more and more each day. So is my cousin John up in the balcony. He was the godfather of the Hester family. He didn't grace the inside of a church very often, and he would be shocked to learn that he was on the cover of a church bulletin and the subject of a Sunday sermon. In the 1940s and 50s, he owned a bar downtown on the corner of Congress Street and Jefferson near the old city market. He and my grandmother lived on the top floor of the building. It's where Wet Willie's is now, right in the middle of city markets. It's gone back to being a bar. The folks at City Market always ask Sherry and me to lead a renewal of vows ceremony for married couples every Valentine's Day night. It's for the community. That's coming up, by the way, in a couple of weeks. And ironically, they have us lead the ceremony at a gazebo that is right in front of my grandfather's building, which my father later turned into a fine dining restaurant. Sure wish we still had that building in our family. It'd be worth a lot of money now, but unfortunately we sold it a long time ago. We Hesters have never been known for our business sense. I didn't get to know my grandfather. He died when I was 3, but I learned a lot about him through mythic stories told about him, some of them good, some of them not so good, and some quite astounding, like the one about him winning Skidaway Island in a card game. Apparently, at one time, Bob briefly owned Skidaway Island. He won it in a game of poker a long time ago, before the island had a bridge to it, before it was developed. Bob didn't want to pay taxes on it, so he gave the property away. Did I mention that Hesters have never been known for their business sense? Then there's the story about Bob helping to invent the famous Johnny Harris barbecue sauce. And then there's the one about him catching over 600 fish in one day off his dock using bread. I'm not sure which of these stories might just be a fish tale, but what I do know is that that last one, the fish story, is not a fish tale. John Burke, who wrote for the Savannah Morning News for many years, wrote an article that was in the paper in either 1961 or 1962 that went like this: "The old standard that mullet will not bite a hook might just as well be tossed out the window. Not only are the freshwater anglers pulling them in from the rivers, but also the saltwater anglers. The saltwater sportsmen are proving that mullet do bite a baited hook." Without going out on a limb, I believe it would be safe to say that Robert Hester is the first person to get this saltwater mullet fishing going in such a way that not just 5 or 6 are caught on hook and line, literally thousands of them are landed each week. This may sound like the truth is being stretched slightly, but it isn't. Hester seldom uses his boat for fishing, since he can catch all he wants from his dock. At one time, Hester, his family, and friends used to spend their time fishing for trout and bass. Now they are completely wrapped up in mullet fishing. And so are most of the Bluffton residents and the few Savannians who know about Hester's trick of the fishing world. Hester's system is unique in more ways than one. Not only has he perfected a method to make them bite, but he also is sure of several hundred around his dock almost all the time. He feeds them bread. And it doesn't take these fish long to spread the word around that Hester has opened up an underwater restaurant just for them. Each time the tide starts to turn, a new school comes to join the bread party. Hester's menu seems to be just what the mullet want. They come by the hundreds. This past Thursday, the fishers from Hester's dock hit a bonanza of mullet. 6 people were fishing. And when the total caught was recorded, there were over 600 mullet ready to go home to the freezers or to be smoked. This may sound like a fantastic figure, and it is, but it's a true one. I've often wondered how in the world my grandfather got the notion to give bread to fish. I have a theory. My grandmother and grandfather loved each other very, very much, but they were as different as night and day. My grandmother was a primitive Baptist. A primitive Baptist is a Southern Baptist on steroids. She knew the Bible backwards and forwards. She never missed church. Every Sunday, she would drive from Bluffton, South Carolina, to Savannah in order to teach a Sunday school class. Up till her death. I bet one day when old Bob was mumbling and grumbling about something, and he did that a lot, I hear, my grandmother said, "Bob, you need to cast your bread upon the water." And he thought she was telling him to get off his behind and help her with some chores, thought she was telling him to get rid of that old stale bread in the kitchen, and so he took it to the dock, tossed it in the water, and eureka! Fish by the hundreds started doing laps around the dock. I can't guarantee that's how it happened, but that's what Bob was doing. He was literally acting out the words from Ecclesiastes. Cast your bread upon the water, and it will come back to you one day. Jesus said it this way, give, and it will be given back to you. For the measure you give will be the measure you get back. We know that in order to get something out of something, we have to put something into it. We have to invest ourselves. This is true for our relationships, for our marriages, for our careers, our education, our talents, our church. And since we are all different, since we have different preferences and talents and gifts and passions, we choose to invest in different things, and that's good. But as followers of Jesus Christ, there are some things we all should be investing in, some things we all should be committed to, such as loving God, loving neighbor, loving creation and taking care of it, standing up for the oppressed, and Jesus told his disciples that they should be committed to fishing for people. Now, fishing back then was not something you did to relax and get away from things. It was their occupation. It was hard work. It was going out into the hot sun before there was cold sodas and sunscreen, and throwing big, heavy nets into the water, pulling them in and cleaning them out. It was difficult and messy. And so when Jesus tells Peter and Andrew that he wants to make them fishers of people, I believe he had in his mind the incredible energy and strength and vitality it took to fish. He was saying, come and bring your energy, your passion, your power to the enterprise of changing lives. Come, cast bread with me, and we will do great things. Sometimes religious institutions haven't been very good at fishing for people. Most congregations are shrinking, churches are closing. The Catholic Church closed over 100 churches in New York last year. We don't feel it as bad as other parts of the country do because we're in the Bible Belt. It's still happening here, but not at the rate as it is at other parts of the country. The church I grew up in here in Savannah recently closed and was sold. One of the main reasons churches haven't caught many fish is because they often have trouble lowering their nets. In our text today, Jesus told the fishermen to lower their nets. That could be used as a metaphor for what the church is called to do. Churches often keep their nets too high. If you want to be part of us, try jumping into our net. See if you can reach it. See if you're good enough. See if you are our type. Do you agree with our doctrine? That's deadening, and it's not the message of Jesus Christ. In the 1960s, there was a movement in the South in Methodism called the Lay Witness Mission Movement. The lay witness movement, instead of relying on ministers to spread the good news and to touch people's lives, called on the laity, the members of the church, to do so. They were empowered to spread the good news and to touch people's lives. And what happened was incredible. You see, what would happen is that a group of people from a church, 15 to 20 people, would travel one weekend to a church in another town and spend time with the members to connect and share with them. You would gather with them on a Friday night, and then most of the day on Saturday, and then, of course, on Sunday morning, and then you would come home. But you would be sharing stories with them about what God had meant to you and what your church family had done for you. And for many people, it was the first time they had heard lay people like them, sharing what God was doing for them in their life. There was something extremely powerful about non-clergy, regular people sharing openly and honestly about life's struggles and life's triumphs. There would be lots of tears shed that weekend on a lay witness mission trip. I know because my family took part of them, and they would take me as a little 10 or 11-year-old boy to go and share my story, because my journey had a story too, and I got to be part of that. And the people we would go see would feel loved and revived, and we would feel revived and renewed through our reaching out to others. It was a good fishing trip. By the way, the first session we have with our new member classes often remind me of those lay witness mission experiences as we go around and share our stories with honesty and authenticity, and how we're often amazed at how we all ended up on the corner of Henry Street and Waters Avenue. That new member class gives a little taste of what the lay witness mission trips were like. Many, many years later, when I was in my late 20s, I went on a spiritual retreat in upstate New York. I heard that one of the featured speakers was a man named Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson, I know that name. Oh, I had not heard that name in many, many years. Ben Johnson was the man who created, who invented, who came up with the incredible idea of the lay witness mission. He was a Methodist minister in the Alabama West Florida Conference. Back in the 50s and 60s, he was seen as one of Methodism's brightest stars. He was very much in demand to lead services and retreats and revivals. Get Ben to speak. But I had not heard Ben's name in many years. I wondered what had happened to him. The bright star seemed to have fizzled out. On the retreat, Ben shared what happened to him. He and his wife got a divorce. And ministers didn't get a divorce in the 1960s and 70s. But Ben said they had to. He said, I believe that God hates divorce, but I believe God hates murder more. And my wife and I were killing each other. It's difficult for ministers to go through a divorce now, but back when Ben went through it, it was something ministers didn't do, especially in the South. If you did, there were consequences. And there were consequences for Ben Johnson. I don't know the details, but I know that Ben felt pressured into leaving the ministry and leaving the United Methodist denomination. Because we sometimes make the tragic mistake of shooting our wounded and keeping our nets too high. Not one of the proudest moments of our denomination. Well, Methodism's loss was the Presbyterians' gain, because Ben would eventually become a Presbyterian minister and a professor at a Presbyterian seminary and do an incredible job of being a director of spiritual development. And so here was one of the brightest lights in our denomination, but he had a problem. He wasn't perfect. He disappointed people. He couldn't jump high enough into the net. So how do we do a better job at lowering the nets? I believe lowering the nets has a lot to do with coming to terms with our own humanity. Acknowledging that none of us are perfect, that every single one of us misses the mark at one time or another, sometimes many times. But that should be okay. Fishing is messy business. Human beings are messy. Church work is messy. When you lower the nets, you're going to pull up some mud, and you're going to bring up all kinds of fish. So we need to keep in mind that the church, the Sabbath, was designed for people, designed to help human beings who will mess up, who will miss the mark. And so instead of creating a holier-than-thou attitude, we should have a celebrating our humanity attitude. In order to lower our nets and be inclusive, we need to be real. We need to be authentic. We need to be ourselves. To let others know that we are human and that we miss the mark, and it's okay for you to be human and to miss the mark. 76 million adults in our nation do not attend church. 76 million. 1/3, 34% of the adults in our country have not attended a church in the last 6 months. We need to lower our nets, and we need to offer some bread. And bread can simply mean getting a cup of coffee with someone. Sitting down with someone with a cup of coffee and getting to know them, asking them to tell you their story, and listening. Listening is great bread. I don't think there is any bread that tastes better than listening bread. You see, my grandfather would have been a tremendous asset to a church. Joking aside, he really was a pretty good businessman. You see, well, even though he did give Skidaway Island away, he didn't need it because he had the store downtown. And then he and his wife did so well, they bought a house down in the Starland district. And then they got a house and some property out in Port Wentworth. And then they went over and got a house and land right on the May River in Bluffton, South Carolina. He did good. Bob Hester was resourceful. The church could have used a fellow like that. And underneath that gruff-looking exterior was a very kind and giving person. He would give someone the shirt off his back. He had a lot to offer a community of faith. See, Jesus did not go to the religious institutions to find his followers. Many of the people he chose were calloused. Fish are cut bait. What you see is what you get, fishermen. They were a lot like my grandfather. They were down to earth, real people who often missed the mark. But that's what made them effective. That's why they were able to connect with people. The best way to reach people is to be a loving, caring, authentic human being, warts and all, to be real. And the church needs people like that, people who are authentic with caring hearts. Those are the people who are really good at fishing. The house we call the Duffy Street house is the house back here in our parking lot. The house that is right on the corner of Duffy Street and Waters Avenue. When I first came to Asbury in 1993, there was a lot of drug activity in the house and in the backyard. You didn't have to see it, you could smell it. For many years after you parked your car, you could get high just walking from the parking lot into the church. How do you think we started attracting so many people here at Asbury? That all changed 15 years ago. That all changed 15 years ago when the church was able to purchase the house. We currently rent it out, but we hope that one day we can use it for the ministries of this church. I hope one day it's kind of like a little health center, possibly offering counseling services and a great health ministry. It's a wonderful mission-style arts and crafts house. It'd be great if this mission-style house could be used for mission. After I came to Asbury in 1993, I learned that one of the first owners of the house back in the 1940s and 50s and 60s was a man named Cohen. Cohen Hester, brother of Bob Hester, brother of the man on the front of your bulletin. Cohen, by the way, was part owner of the feed store Hester and Zipper, which is still going strong today. So I guess we Hesters are good business people. But you know what that means, that Cohen Hester lived here? That means Bob was in our backyard all the time, right here. And we missed him. He never made it inside. There are all sorts of people right at us, right outside of these walls. And there are people who are just one email click away. one phone call away, one text away, who would benefit from our lowered nets and some good bread. Let them know there is a place where they will be loved and valued for who they are, warts and all. There are people out there who have questions about the meaning of life. What's it all about? People who want to make life count for something. They have mortgages and families and struggles and problems, and they have yearnings in their hearts that cry out for an answer just as we do. They are needing to hear some good news, and they want a purpose. That's what we have. We have good news, and we can give them a purpose. We have bread. Take, eat, do this in remembrance of me. My grandfather had a lot to offer the body of Christ. He would have been a great catch. There are a lot more Bobs out there. Let us lower our nets and offer some bread. Amen and amen.